Hey there, welcome to the IDP Plus podcast. I'm your host, Axton Harding, and if you have a hankering for some IDP pickups to scour your Dynasty Waiver Wires for, then sit tight. In just a second, we're going to dive into some players you should mind the waiver wire for in your IDP Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. And we're back. Welcome, new watchers, listeners. Happy to have you. Repeat listeners, as always, thank you for joining us. Today, we're getting down and dirty with some waiver wire mining tactics and players to keep an eye out for. If you're anything like me, you like to get the next IDP stud well before the breakout. So you're scouring the waiver wires and tracking free agent moves in the offseason to see what the IDP landscape is going to look like for the upcoming season. You're always searching for the next Robert Spillane, Caden Ellis, or what have you to pop up out of nowhere. So let's get into it. Let's see here. First, what are we looking for? Well, it just kind of depends on your team needs. Defensive linemen and linebackers are generally best mined from waivers in the offseason, while defensive backs, we kind of have to wait for games to approach so we can see proper usage, because now the league has turned into a primarily passing league, so you're seeing a lot more defenses add another back to the defensive group, where we're seeing 5 defensive backs now. So a lot more options on each team for production. Generally, that's going to give you more options for IDP as well. So if you just kind of wait for the first couple of weeks and grab a couple of guys who are maybe in some roles that we didn't necessarily know, slot role, a nickelback role, where they play around the line of scrimmage, sometimes we just don't know that until we see it. So defensive backs can be a little bit tricky. If you want some advice on defensive backs, go watch Ricky's DB rankings episode. He will drill down and kind of give you a little bit more insight as to some defensive backs. But for today, I've got some defensive linemen and linebackers that I think could help your IDP team. So first of all, it's very helpful to be just familiar with the roster makeup of each team. So just kind of dive into some rankings or something throughout each season and just familiarize yourself with that. This just kind of helps whenever you see a signing in the offseason or a trade. You can just kind of be in tune with the move, and you can start to be able to tell what the environment is going to look like that they're going into with minimal kind of research, because you already have an idea of what players are on this team that this player you're tracking is going to, so you can get an idea and a feel for what kind of competition they have and what kind of opportunity they might have for potential snaps and production. It's just like I was saying. It's kind of like, are they walking into a team with a crowded room at the position? Does this team have a need for the position, which would indicate that maybe this player is moving into a starting role where maybe they came from an LB2 role? Does this defense deploy this position in a way that can boost their production? Do they play 2 starting linebackers, or do they rotate the second linebacker? Do they rotate all the linebackers? For example, what have previous players at this position for this team done on paper that we can gauge production on for the player we're looking at? So how has this team generally deployed their linebackers so that we can predict how the linebacker we are tracking will be used in this new defense? So, if you have a light pulse on things already, it just saves you so much time researching, and really all it takes is just kind of keeping a good eye on some rankings throughout a season, and just kind of have an eye of, okay, so here's the 2 linebackers for this team. This team only really deploys to 1 because they have only 1 linebacker in the top so many. The others are just kind of spread, and snaps aren't matching up. So just having a pulse on the landscape already really saves you so much time. And then from there, it's just following snap counts, following production, and just going about it that way. So first of all, get a good idea of what the landscape looks like already. Most teams generally only start 2 full-time defensive ends and 2 full-time linebackers. But there's also a handful of teams in the league that will only start 1 full-time linebacker, and they will rotate on the defensive line. So we have to be we have to be careful about what teams we're evaluating and players alike. So just a couple of quick little tidbits there. But, other ways you can get familiar also include mock drafting. Get into some mock drafts this offseason. If you need mock drafts, let me know. Throw them in the comments. I know some people that do mock drafts that are in best ball leagues. That's another thing. I know some IDP only best ball leagues that are going all off season. Throw them in the comments. I'll refer you. You guys can get in these things all off season long. Now, mock drafting obviously would be free. Best ball leagues, the ones that I know about, generally are like $5, like $3 to $5 to get in. So about the price of a cup of coffee. Draft your team, leave it, check back at the end of the season and see if you won any money. You might win $20 or something like that. But also at the same time, while you're drafting, you are getting a good idea for the value of players and how your peers are valuing those players as well. So you can see where the value might lie. And the more you do these drafts in the offseason, the better your idea of the landscape gets as well. So just a couple of little things that you can do to help educate yourself. Check out scoring leaders. Go to your fantasy scores. Go to your fantasy app and just look up previous scores. Familiarize yourself with the top end scores on each position year over year. Just get an idea for who's out there and who has performed. So you can just, like say, compare year over year performances and just see what's changed and just familiarize yourself that way. There's sources out there. Again, if you need help, throw a comment down and I will get in there and I will help guide you where you need to go. There are tools, there are websites, there are sources out there to help you increase your knowledge of the IDP side of the ball. So, enough strategy talk. Let's get into the meat of the episode and start talking some IDP. If the strategy is something that you guys would be into, throw that in the comments too. I'll look to get some episodes out at a future date, hopefully soon. If that's something that people would be interested in to, kind of break it down from a strategic standpoint, a little bit more tips that I use to help me in my IDP league. So again, throw that down in the comments if that's something you guys would be interested in. But for now, we've got waiver wire gold. So let's get into it. Our first player here, we're going to start with defensive linemen. We'll go into linebackers. So our first defensive lineman here, I'm looking at Deatrich Wise. Deatrich Wise is the defensive end now for the Washington Commanders. He's 30 years old, and he's historically been with New England for much of his career in the NFL. Was acquired by Washington in free agency, and he, comes from the Patriots, who are historically have a rotational background on the defensive line. Like I was alluding to earlier, they often like to keep their defensive linemen fresh, so they don't really play more than 65% of the snaps, where if we're looking for a starting defensive lineman or linebacker, we want to generally see 80 or more snaps. I know defensive linemen, 80 plus snaps is not near as common, but if we can get 70 to 80, that's kind of what we like to see. 60% of snaps tells me that he's always been a rotational player, so a part-time player. So, 30 to 40 snaps a game. Actually, that might be more down like 50%. So, but nonetheless, he's been productive, respectively. Anyways, his best season in 2022 came with more like 65% of the snaps, but he ended the season with 7.5 sacks, which was 14th among DLs at that time. 59 tackles for a defensive lineman. That was 17th among DLs. So this is all as a rotational piece, playing 50% of the snaps, and he was ranked 14th and 17th overall in sacks and tackles alike. So I mean, he's someone that has proved that he can produce. I'm not going to say he's going to end up top 10 by any stretch or anything close, but if you're looking for somebody who could add immediate help and points to your team, if you're weak at defensive line and you need some options there, he would definitely add some valuable depth, and it might even turn into somebody you find putting in a flex position or something this offseason, depending on your league. I'll kind of go into it a little bit more here, where he goes to a defensive lineman room that's actually thin on the edges. You only have Dorrance Armstrong, Clyland Farrell, and Frankie Louvu sometimes will come in off the edge and join the pass rush. So, but that's about it. They lost Dante Fowler last year. They didn't really have a strong pass rush anyways. So I think there's going to be ample opportunity for Deatrich Wise to get some snaps in DC. So I would imagine that they draft help on the defensive line in the NFL draft, but I don't imagine it's going to be anybody that will keep Wise from being a most of the time kind of player. I would say that we jump from his 50% historical usage to something more like 60 to 70% of snaps. Hopefully, I would guess right around 60 to 65. But we'll just have to see. I think with the looks of this room, it's likely he could see something like a full-time role, which we would consider right around 70 to 80% of snaps for a defensive lineman. So, I say we could very well see him mimic that 2022 season I mentioned earlier, if not improve upon it with the opportunity for potential usage. Washington is not a team that's going to rotate their defensive linemen quite like New England. New England is always keeping guys fresh. In Washington, they just really haven't had many people here, so they just kind of throw things at the wall and see what sticks. So, Deatrich Wise of the Washington Commanders, keep an eye on him. Check your waiver wires. If he's already rostered in your league, he might be a nice little add-in to another trade. So, somebody that could definitely help your defensive line. We've got one more defensive lineman here. We're looking at Jonathan Allen, defensive tackle. So this may not necessarily apply to all leagues, but I think even in the more shallower leagues that have defensive linemen, Jonathan Allen could prove to be worthy this year. He goes to the Minnesota Vikings, 30 years old. This longtime veteran defensive tackle is getting his first crack at a fresh start after being drafted 17th overall in the 2017 draft by the then Washington Redskins. His career for IDP Fantasy Football has been up and down overall in terms of ceiling play for sack points. He's finished with as high as 9 sacks, which is respectable, but nothing like 10 plus like what we want to see kind of from our edges. But for a defensive tackle, 9 sacks, that's pretty good. So we've also seen him finish a season with as low as 2 sacks as well. So that's why I say we've got a little bit of variation here in the sack department, but what we can rely on is a solid floor for tackles. So pretty much every year he's a lock for 60 or more tackles as a defensive tackle. That is outstanding. That is a solid floor that we can rely on for fantasy football. A floor. We love a floor. So considering the upside that we could get with the sacks, I like having a baseline of points that I can rely on each week. So somebody that I can slot in there and I'm like, okay, I know he's going to get at least 6 tackles, however that might look, assist or solo. I know he's going to put up production and I'm going to get points out of this position. So if you are desperate and in need, it might be somebody to kind of stash. Again, add as a light piece. He's not going to be expensive at 30 years old if somebody's rostering him and he might have been dropped last season. So just somebody to kind of keep an eye on in this offseason. So like I said, we can rely on that solid floor. What we can also rely on is a solid bill of health. He's historically finished most of his seasons to the fullest. So with regard to his injury last year, he's only really missed like a handful of games in his career. So he has a solid floor for tackling production, and we can expect him to be on the field. Those are 2 important things that we love to see for IDPs. So now he lands with the Vikings, who have a notorious defensive front. Last year, they were just tearing offenses and quarterbacks up. Jonathan Grenard, Dallas Turner, AVG, Andrew Van Ginkel coming off the edge in Minnesota. This is a tremendous help for a defensive tackle, especially a 30-year-old one. So eyes will be primarily on the edge and linebackers and not the middle of the defensive line. So he's kind of going to fall into the shadows, and I think this is where Jonathan Allen could thrive. The position for Minnesota has always kind of been a lucrative one on the tackling front anyways, so that bodes well for our solid tackling floor. We have a guy who has a floor for tackling production, and we have a position that provides a solid floor for the same production points. So things are lining up here, and we like to see that. For example, Harrison Phillips had no less than 55 tackles in any of his three full seasons as a starter for the Minnesota Vikings in that defensive interior. And I think the signing of Allen either says they want more pressure in the middle versus a run stuffer, or as opposed to a run stuffer like Harrison Phillips, or they want to rotate on the inside. I think either way, this could be pretty lucrative for Jonathan Allen. I think he's a guy that's going to get his no matter the amount of snaps that he plays. But I feel like this signing tells us that they weren't getting enough out of Harrison Phillips for the last few years, so they wanted to get more of an established presence on the inside of this defensive line and maybe use Harrison Phillips to spell him. So I think, like I said, I think the former is going to be the case where they just want to put more pressure in the middle as opposed to rotate these defensive tackles. So Allen, I think, should be at the very least get the lion's share of the snaps. Overall, I think we should continue to see the outstanding tackling floor play from Allen this year, especially in this new lucrative position. That said, I think he's well worth the investment as a potential waiver wire pickup if he was dropped and he is not on a roster at this point in your season, or even, as I mentioned earlier, a light addition to maybe a bigger trade for a more just kind of adding him as a small piece to a larger trade for a bigger asset. So, you're going to have a floor at the position if you need help. He's going to be on the field. So, if you need help at defensive lineman, consider throwing Jonathan Allen on your team. So, after last year with just 3 sacks, I think we can definitely expect some positive regression for Jonathan Allen this season in Minnesota, joining a notorious pass rush. Enough defensive lineman talk. Let's get into linebackers. Everybody loves linebackers. I've got 4 of them for you, so let's jump into it. First of all, we've got Akeem Davis-Gaither, formerly of the Cincinnati Bengals. He now joins the Arizona Cardinals at 27 years old. When Logan Wilson went down last year, it was ADG who came in week 13 and excelled. He had 58 tackles in 6 games at 9.6 per game. Of those tackles, 4 of them were tackles for a loss. He had a forced fumble and a fumble recovery and 2 pass deflections in coverage. Dude was just flat out getting it done for IDP. And now he lands in a place where the top linebacker spot is up for grabs. So the only competition really that I've seen there so far is Mack Wilson. Kaiser White left in free agency. Mack Wilson kind of slides in. Mack Wilson didn't really overproduce at the position, but I know historically this team loves Mack Wilson, but they've never really loved Mack Wilson to the point where they're going to put him in the most valuable position. Maybe that changes this year. That would be really the only caveat here, is if ADG gets out-favored by Mack Wilson and he ends up sliding into the LB2 role. But I think there could still be potential because this team does generally roll out 2 full-time linebackers. I think last year they rotated a little bit, but this might be able to make the difference. They've not historically been one that you just hate that LB2 role. There's been production there in the past. So maybe even if Mack Wilson supplants him for that main spot, maybe ADG can still carve himself out a role at the LB2. But that would be the only caveat. I think ADG's season last year as a LB2 for the Cincinnati Bengals far outweighs Mack Wilson's LB2 season, and I think that's why they would have brought him in, especially having let go of Kaiser White as opposed to Mack Wilson in this offseason. So I think ADG is fit to come in and take over this LB1 role, and this LB room has historically been a lucrative one. So we like to see historical production at this position on this team. ADG has proved himself worthy last year after having got 58 tackles in 6 games, averaging nearly 10 per game. So I think should he get the main role, we could be looking at 130 or more tackles, similar to that of Kaiser White's performance last year in 2024 for this same team in this same position. So Akeem Davis-Gaither, linebacker for the Arizona Cardinals, 27 years old. Go check your waiver wires. If you have a trade discussion going already, don't feel bad for adding him as a little additional piece. I think he could prove to be worthy for you. And if nothing else, add him as depth. He would make a great depth piece. All of this, all of ultimately this episode is to more pad depth or add for a position of desperate need. If you are really thin at a position, you need someone who's going to step into a big role. These guys could potentially help. Enough Akeem Davis-Gaither. Let's get into our next player here. We've got Elandon Roberts. Elandon Roberts, linebacker for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's 30 years old. He comes in from Pittsburgh. Throughout his career, Roberts has played in a rotational role for defenses that barely roll out a full-time linebacker. New England with Bill Belichick, they always rotated linebackers. Nobody ever wanted to roster a New England linebacker for the last 10, 20 years. It's insane trying to follow that production and gauge what to expect. Miami. He went to Miami under Vic Fangio, who operates the same way. There's very few linebackers that come out of Miami that are solid, reliable producers. Now we have, I think Jordan Brooks went to Miami. Now he's somewhat reliable at the position, but beyond that, it's kind of a toss-up who's going to get any kind of production because they just rotate that LB2. Same with Pittsburgh. Tomlin, who has historically not rotated out more than a single full-time linebacker. They rotate the LB2. So outside of Patrick Queen, you really don't know who's going to get all the snaps, and you don't know who's going to produce because they all come in and out of certain packages. So these teams make IDP Fantasy Football a nightmare because you really can't trust anyone outside their Mike or primary linebacker. So most teams will carry two full-time linebackers, as I said earlier, and maybe rotate the third if they have it. But there are teams that will only roll out one. So that's where I say we have to kind of be careful. So regardless of having always shared the field, Elandon Roberts has posted 2 consecutive 100-plus tackle seasons in 2022 and 2023. So that's pretty impressive for someone who really plays no more than 75% of the snaps, unless injury required him to play more. So he's kind of always played 60 to 70, roughly the part-time role. Actually, not even that. He's probably played more like 50 to 60% of the snaps generally, unless there was just kind of a little bit of vacancy and he had to step in and play more of a full-time role. So and in a rotational role, still being able to get 100 tackles or more in 2 consecutive seasons is wild. So even if he were playing 3/4 of the snaps, still not necessarily a full-time role. He's kind of always been someone that just rotates in, keeps people fresh, and ends up producing. So let's not also forget his ability to pass rush. 7 sacks in those 2 years as well, to go with 19.5 tackles for loss. 19.5 in 2 years. That's nuts, especially for a linebacker. So and not to mention, and in a limited role. For a linebacker, 19.5 tackles for loss in a limited role in 2 years and 7 sacks, that's pretty impressive for a rotational player. So history bodes well for the role that he's now looking to fill for Las Vegas. Vegas is definitely a team that carries 2 full-time linebackers, so that is encouraging off the rip. The only caveat with this would be that he's got to beat out another new face to the linebacker room in Vegas, being a first-round pick in Devin White. Devin White recently signed with the Raiders this offseason. So that's the only tricky part about this is Devin White might get the nod to start out. But, like I said earlier, Vegas rolls out 2 full-time linebackers. So this really just means that Devin White's going to get the primary Mike linebacker where he'd play in a more fantasy favorable role, but that's not to say that LB2 can't be productive here. A couple of years ago, we saw Denzel Perryman and Devon Diablo putting up some pretty solid fantasy seasons. They still have the same DC. Also, in 2022, Spillane broke out in a huge way with 140 tackles, while the LB2 role was well on pace to over 115 tackles in Denzel Perryman as well before he got injured. So Devin White is also another one to check your waiver wires for due to his pedigree. I'm sure he's rostered, but both these linebacker roles are going to be very valuable, and these are 2 guys who have the pedigree and or the history of production to be able to make this position very lucrative for IDP. When given the opportunity, Elandon Roberts has thrived. I imagine we will see 70 to 80+% of snaps. I don't see anybody on this team really being a threat to either of these guys, so we might see 80+% of snaps for both of them right off the rip. Snaps are king. If you have somebody getting 80 or more percent of the snaps and they're not producing, that is just a dud player. Those are players I avoid. But if you see somebody getting 80% of the snaps and they show signs, pick up on those guys. I think right out of the gate, we're going to see Elandon Roberts and Devin White probably come into Vegas and soak up 80 or more percent of the snaps right out of the gate. So check your waiver wires for Elandon Roberts, even Devin White. Throw them on your bench. If you need some linebacker help, I think these two guys are going to slot right into those full-time linebacker roles in Vegas. Now let's get into some Nate Landman. If you've been following IDP the last few years, you know all about Nate Landman, the linebacker now for the LA Rams. Signed this offseason. He's 26 years old. The UDFA from 2022 quickly made an impact in the league as a sophomore. For Atlanta, 110 tackles in 2023 and 14 games played. He started off as a part-time player and turned full-time when Troy Anderson went down. Then 2024, same kind of deal, filling for Anderson again, got 80 tackles in 2024 and 13 games played. So there's a trend here that he may, having also looking at the games played, he may miss a game here or there with some minor dings. Him and Troy Anderson kind of traded injuries off the field this season for whatever reason, but overall he's very reliable when he's on the field. Now he gets a fresh start, new contract, new team in LA, and he earns himself a full-time spot out of the gate in LA. LA didn't re-sign Troy Reeder or Christian Roseboom. They both left in free agency last year as the green dot, and the primary Mike linebacker Roseboom had 130 plus tackles. I think it was 133. Over 130 tackles for this primary linebacker spot. Now it's between Nate Landman, or Omar Speights to man the two full-time linebacker roles in LA. So I imagine that Landman, being the senior veteran, will probably take the Mike or primary linebacker role and potentially the green dot. Now, the only caveat with this one is Omar Speights has the familiarity with the system. But familiarity and production and performance don't necessarily equate to the same kind of results. So I think Landman, having proven his prowess on the field the last two seasons as a rotational piece or fill-in, I think he's going to get the nod as the primary linebacker in LA. So either way, this is a team that will roll out two full-time linebackers, and they will both be very productive. We've seen it time and time again from this team, same DC, all of that. So, and the fact that he could be a potential green dot candidate, keep an eye out for Mike Wollert's article on Twitter of the IDP show. He puts out a green dot article later in the offseason of just players for each team that he thinks is going to wear the green dot. The person that's calling the plays is going to be on the field the most. You love snaps. Following snaps. Green dot means snaps. We love snaps. Snaps means you're on the field. You're an important piece of the defense, and you're going to be in a productive role, most likely, with regard to some defensive backs who get the green dot. Of course, they are an important piece of the defense, but they aren't always productive for IDP. If you get a linebacker with a green dot, generally they're right in the middle of the field. They're the most productive on their linebacking room. So, a little bit on Nate Landman there. Go check your waiver wires for some Nate Landman. It's very possible he's been dropped, or you could get him for some. You could probably get him for some fab, honestly, if you reached out to a team. So, like I mentioned earlier, adding him as a light piece to a larger trade, just kind of a little toss in, just make him look like a toss in. You could probably get him for cheap, or he might be on your waiver wires. I've already picked him up in a couple of leagues of mine. Go check it out. Nate Landman will be stepping into a full-time role. He will not disappoint. Now to wrap up the show, we've got some Cody Barton talk. So, you guys have probably heard plenty about Cody Barton in the last couple of years. This NFL journeyman now joins the Tennessee Titans at 28 years old. He's formerly played for the Seattle Seahawks, the Washington Commanders, and the Denver Broncos in the last 3 years. Now, that considered, he's put up some pretty great fantasy IDP numbers since his 2022 breakout, where he reached 133 tackles in 2022 with Seattle. He had 121 in 2023 with Washington and 103 in 2024 with Denver. We saw some regression in 2024 when he was playing next to one of the best tacklers in the NFL, and Alex Singleton, for much of the year. But 7.6 tackles a game in those 3 seasons overall is still outstanding for IDP production in fantasy football. So now he gets a fresh opportunity in one of the most lucrative LB roles in the league with Tennessee. And now with 3 years of historical production, we've seen him put points on the board and stats in the box score. So we've seen this position do well historically. So let's see. In 2022, we saw David Long go for 86 tackles, which he was on pace for over 120 before he went down with injury. In 2023, we saw Azeez Al-Shaair rack up 163 tackles in this position. Last season was tough as they couldn't really keep a healthy linebacker all year. They had Jerome Baker and Kenneth Murray kind of trading injuries, but both of them were still on pace for 100 plus or 115 plus for Kenneth Murray if they had played every game as the LB2. The LB2 was on pace for 115 or 100 plus, and the LB1 got got 163 tackles in 2023. This position can produce. So, needless to say, the primary linebacker spot in Tennessee is a good one to be in. Cody Barton, somehow or another, always seems to find himself in the most productive vacancies, and he produces. So, he'll be playing alongside sophomore linebackers Cedric Gray at this time. $7 million a year, 3 years, $7 million a year tells me that they want Barton as the guy in the middle of this defense, and I imagine that Gray will play alongside him as the complementary LB2 role, which is still ought to be full time. But I would be willing to bet the Tennessee Titans probably add some help in the draft, but nobody that's going to just step in and supplant Cody Barton. Maybe Cedric Gray, but I think Cody Barton is pretty safe to have the primary Mike linebacker role in Tennessee. We could be looking at another 130 plus tackle season out of Cody Barton, which tracks right in line with kind of how he's done stepping into numerous roles over his career. That's going to wrap things up. Go check your waiver wires for some Cody Barton, some Nate Landman, some Elandon Roberts, some Akeem Davis-Gaither, Jonathan Allen, Deatrich Wise. If you have some trades going and you've got your trade partner might have one of these guys sitting on the bench, throw him in there as a light addition piece, be equal to a 4th, 5th round pick. Get him for nothing. Go check your waiver wires for these guys. They could help you big time this offseason as they go into full-time roles or appear to be going into a very opportunistic role with their new teams. And that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, go check out the website, idpplus.com. Go check out the YouTube. Throw some comments, like, subscribe. On the website, we've got tons of new articles and tools, and YouTube's pumping out with some the bets YouTube is going right now. Sebastian's getting into UFL, and he's already done great so far. So go check out the website. Go check out go check out the description. We've got some promo codes going on right now for you to get 50% off at the website. So go check out all the descriptions. There's promo codes and all of that. So and use it at checkout. Check out the website and see. Just kind of give us an opportunity. We've got a Discord where people are answering questions 24/7. Check it out. See if you like it. Check it out for a month. If you want to make your money worth it, get a year-long subscription. We've got a lot of good things coming this year. So just sit tight and enjoy the ride. So again, I wanted to kind of come back to my earlier point where if strategy for IDP is something that interests people. I know it's kind of tough to self-educate. If IDP strategy is something that you guys would be interested in, throw it in the comments. I'll throw it on tap for one of the future episodes, and we'll get into some strategy in this offseason. So I just wanted to more or less throw that out there and sign off. So again, like, subscribe, comment, check the website out, check the YouTube out, support our show, and we'll see you next time on the IDP Plus podcast.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.